Okay, so if you can go to Lao Lima and resources, the daily work folder, then go to the folder with today's date. Okay, if you weren't here last time, you also want to look at the folder from last time because there's a zip file in there that contains the 2 PHP scripts that we worked on last time. So you probably want to take a look at that and then update your PHP scripts with those. Okay, but let's look at today's one. Okay, first thing is a reminder, we have an exam next time. Now, the security for this campus is conducting some sort of emergency exercise that day. So it shouldn't affect us. And even if it's still going on at the time our class starts, it's certainly not going to last the entire time. So it shouldn't affect us, but just be aware that something might happen. And most likely it's just going to be those of you that signed up for those emergency notices, you'll get like text messages or something like that. And it is a test, so you don't have to, if you see something, you can pretty much ignore it until they just say they're all clear. But exactly what scenario it's supposed to emulate, they didn't tell us because they said otherwise it wouldn't be a good test. So I can't tell you what it's going to be, but it'll be pretty safe to just ignore those things just because it is a test. Okay, so that will happen, but hopefully it doesn't affect us much. Okay, so on Laulimo, I already posted the answers to the study guide sample questions. Okay, so our exam is next time. Okay, so suppose you have a table that's created using the following SQL statement. And it says write down the insert statement that would be used to insert a record for Jane Doe who has this username, a password, and so forth. Now, to simplify this question, it's not using a salted and encoded password, right? So it's just for the purpose of a test question. It's not a test question. The test is not about salted and encoded passwords. So to simplify it, it's just the password is plain text, which is not a good idea, but that's okay. It's just a test question. Okay, so it's just checking to see if you can write down the correct syntax for a basic insert statement. So let me bump that up in size a little bit. Okay. So remember the syntax is insert into, those are just keywords, you always have to use that. Then it's going to have the table name. Then if you're not going to basically insert all of the field values, then you should put a first set of parentheses to put the field names that you intend to insert into. Okay. Whenever you do something like this, the ones that you're not inserting into should have a default value, otherwise it has nothing stored there. Okay, but should have the parentheses. These are the actual field names, right? So make sure you get those spelled just like how it's defined in the table. Then the keyword values, then the second set of parentheses where you're putting in values there. The key thing to remember when you're doing an insert, when you're putting the actual values, that if it's text, it has to be enclosed inside a single quotes, and then if it's numbers, then it should not have any quotes around it. We haven't done anything where we had to insert a date, but when you're inserting a date, it expects it to be inside of single quotes. Okay, but that's not going to be on the exam. Okay, but just remember text, single quotes, numbers, no quotes around it, and that's a good enough thing to remember for the exam. Okay, then the next question was write down a select statement that would display. Okay, so this is an insert query. Now we're looking at a select query. Display the user's username, department, and division. So select username, department, division from users. If we wanted to see a particular user, then we could add a where clause, right? To say where ID equals something to pick a particular user, or where first name and last name were set. Okay, and then there finally is a update query, okay, that's going to alter Jane Doe's department to become department B. Okay, so the syntax for it is update, table name, then the keyword set, and then you're going to have the name of the field, the equal symbol, and then the value that you want to set that to. And usually, okay, you're going to have a where clause that identifies the specific record in the table that you're trying to update. Okay, so if you look at the online materials, I updated the part of the web pages that go into updating. It shows you several different examples of updating, but here's the basic one: update, table name, set, and you have the field name equals the value you're going to set it, and then a where clause that tells you which record that you're trying to update. If you have more than one field that you're trying to update, then you would have the field name equals the value, then a comma, and then the second field name equals the value for that field, and then so forth. Okay, so it would just be separated by commas where you have the field name and then the value that it's supposed to be set to. Okay, any questions on the answers to the sample questions? Okay, any questions on the exam itself? Okay, so make sure you prepare for it. If you look back at the study guide itself, okay, so in resources, I want to just remind you that those are topics for the exam that could have essay questions. So there's going to be questions on Python GUI programs as in project 2, okay? And you won't have to write any Python code, you won't have to explain any Python code, but there will be essay questions on Python GUI programs. There will be essay questions on the .pgpass file as well. Okay, as well as select, insert, and update. And then select, insert, and update, you're going to have basically a simple database that's set up, and then you're going to be asked to do the 3 different types of queries. Okay, so select queries, insert queries, and update queries. Okay, any questions? Okay, if not, if you think of any between now and Monday, then you can always email me to get your question clarified. All right. Okay, so coming back to the next part then is we gotta go back and work on project 3. Okay, so we're gonna go in Windows Explorer, and then we're gonna open up the files handle login.php and home.php, and then we're gonna identify the parts of the files that need to be modified. Okay, as it states right there, if you were not here last time, grab that file and then extract the file to get handle login.php and home.php from last time, because then you'll be starting off at the same place that we're going to start up in. Okay, so make sure you take care of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that first step. Okay, so I'm going to the main Docker folder. Okay, and I'm going into docs, and where we're working in, remember there's 2 project 3 folders. One is inside a CENT280, That's the one with your main PHP scripts, because CENT280 is the one that gets mapped to the web document root inside the PHP Apache container. And then include, which is specifically outside of this, that's where the other project 3 is. That's where our SQL scripts and the one PHP script that has sensitive information on how to connect to the backend database, that's where those are contained. Okay, so remember, for project 3, you're going to have to explain the setup. So you're going to be asking the person to extract the zip file or tar.gz file, whichever way you put it up. And then you need to copy files into folders, and the 2 folders will be the project 3 folders inside of CENT280 and inside of include, right? Those project 3, and then so you need to say which files go into which location. So in the include, for example, if you look at the project 3, those are all the SQL scripts. Okay, there's extra things which are not needed when you turn in the project, but if you have them in there, it doesn't hurt. Like this Python programs, those are not needed. If you're going to explain in your instructions getting rid of the extra functions that come from the PG Crypto extension, then don't explain how to run make drop.py on functions.txt to create drop.sql and run it. Simply include drop.sql and say that you need to include this as the super user to get rid of those extra functions. Okay, so just include this instead. Okay, so, and then explain about project3.php, how you have to check to make sure that you have the correct IP address for the Postgres SQL service. And remember, to do that, you need to look at the Docker network for the Docker CENT280 Win7 database. Okay, so, excuse me. Okay, so that's one of them. And then if you go back up to docs and then CENT280, the project 3 folder inside of there, that's all where your main PHP scripts are located. And the 2 that we worked on last time was handle login.php and home.php. So we're going to take a look at those, okay, and then identify what needs to be worked on there. And then actually we're going to go and make a fix to one of them, because as I was looking things over after last time, I discovered that the name of one of the session variables is going to cause us trouble. Now, what we'll do is specifically leave it so that it's not fixed yet, so that you can see what the error looks like and what you might have to do to try to debug the error. Okay. In this case, I'll help you to fix it because it's my mistake, because I told you that you only have to modify these 2 files plus choose request.php and handle edit request.php, and actually the conflict is in the handle add request.php, which I didn't tell you have to fix. So you would either have to change what you have in handle login, or you got to change what's in handle add request. Since we're going to say handle add request should work without any changes, that means we need to fix handle login.php. Okay, so let's open those files. So I'm going to open handle login.php with Genie, and I could have a number of files open in Genie. Oh, I guess I close it. Okay, so that's one. And then the other one I want to open is home.php. Those are the 2 files that we worked on last time. Okay, so in handle login.php, let's take a look at the parts that remain to be done. Okay, so whenever you see these comments in red, that's potentially a place where you need to change something. When you see var_dump, That's just a way of displaying an array type variable as opposed to echo. So that's for debugging, so you can just ignore that. But when it has something like this, that means that you need to do something. When the person logs in, okay, and we call the check user function, it's going to return 4 values. So here, only 3 of them have been stored in the session data. Remember, what the session data is for is a place to store things so that if I go to another page using redirection, which is what header does, that redirects to another file, it makes those values available in that page that I redirect to. Okay, if I'm looking at login.php, that has a form, and when you submit the form, then it passes the data via post. So you just need to grab the data out of the post variables when you reach that destination page. But when you do a redirect, then unless you decide to use get, which means that you would tack on the variables that you want to pass on to this name right here, okay, so the address that you're going to, then you need to store the data and session data. And that's a more secure way of doing it. And so if you take CENT280 at some point, then that's the way that you would be doing things, is you would be storing things in session data. Okay, so let me reiterate. Since there's 4 values that are returned from the check user function, you need to store 4, and this only stores 3 so far. Let's also talk about something that's important. If you look at the SQL statement, okay, it's basically saying select check user, but there's some extra things in there so that it separates what comes back into 4 separate fields, and that's what we want because it's easier to deal with. So we say select, and we separate it out into ID, department name, div name, and user type from check user, and you pass the username and password. And then you need to put as, and you need to specify the data types for each of those individual names. Now, the names, there's nothing magic about the names. You just choose it so that it reminds you of what you're trying to store. Okay, so if I said select var1, var2, var3, var4, and I put var1, var2, var3, and var4 there, it would work. But then that's a bad way to do it, right? Because then you look at it later on and you go, what's var1? I don't know what var1 is. But if I look at this, I go ID, oh, that's a user's ID. Oh, what's the department name? Oh, that must be the user's department name, and so forth. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so what's getting returned from running this query is the ID field, department name, div name, user type. Okay, remember I said those names, there's nothing magical about it, so it does not have to match field names. It just has to match the number of values that's coming back from calling the check user function. Okay, and if you look at the check user function, it returns 4 values, which happen to be the user's ID, the department name for the user, the division name for the user, and the user type for the user. Okay, so these names are not meaningless. We choose it because that accurately describes what's coming back, but it doesn't have to match field names, okay? Because that's just names that you choose in order to make this work. Okay, so if you look here, I got the ID from the row. Remember, when you return the data after you execute the query, and then I grab the row from fetching from this record set, which returns. Okay, so here's the ID. This is the department name, the user type. So what I'm missing is division name. So you need to add that in. Okay, and so I'm going to let you do that. Okay, there's actually one part here which we're going to have to fix. So I'm telling you there's something wrong with this so far. We could log in, but we're going to run into trouble when we try to add a request. Okay, so we'll do that in a little while and then you'll see what happens. Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little bit further. Okay, no more red marks, right, which are comments. So this is the place you need to update. Okay, so it's not completely updated. In fact, there's there's a mistake there that's going to come back to bite us when we actually try to add a request. Okay, but that's the area. Now let's look at home.php. Okay, that's just a name, that's nothing. Get session variables. Okay, what I've gotten here are two of the variables, right? I got the department name and the user type. I didn't get the ID, I didn't get the division name. Okay, so those are things that you would need to add on, right? So there should be 4 statements here when you're getting the session variables, because there's 4 session variables that we need to keep track of. Okay, then this var dump, that's for debugging, so you can ignore that. But handle member and div head cases, that has to be done. So the case that is handled is if it's a department head, right? That's the only case that we have handled up until this point. Okay, so you need to handle 2 more cases. We're not going to handle the administrator case. In fact, we didn't even add an administrator user, although it wouldn't be hard to just add one in. But we need to handle these 2 cases. Okay, so that's where you need to make changes. So 2 places you need to make changes for home.php. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, so we're going to come back and fix handle login.php a little bit. Okay, not going to do it completely. That's part of the work that you have to try to carry out. Okay, so when I give you time to work on that today, after we get done with this, then that's what you want to try to do. Okay, so what you need to think of is, even if you were building this from scratch, since there are 3 cases that you're trying to handle, so if the user type is department head, if the user type is member, if the user type is div head, 3 cases you're trying to handle, it's a very good idea to handle them one at a time. So get one to work. When that works, then add on another case. Check to see if that works. When that works, then go on to the last case, right? Incremental development, you want to make sure that you're doing that. And in fact, though, what we have, okay, is an application where we can log in, okay, but if I try to log in with a user that's not a department head at this case, then it's not going to work, right? Because I don't have those cases handled. That's one thing. The other thing is, though, if I do log in as a department head, can I get other parts of the application to work? So the parts where you add a request, that supposedly should work if I log in as someone that's a department head. Okay. So that's what we want to test, and then see what actually occurs, and then see what we need to do to fix it. Okay, so I'm gonna start up a ConEMU terminal. Let me start up a second one. This time, I need to start up 2 ConEMU terminals, because once I'm doing the PHP scripting part, I'm going to need to have at least 2 windows open, one connected on the PHP side and one on the PHP Apache side and one on the database side. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so first let's set the environment variables. Okay, so I have that done in both. I'm going to change into the main Docker directory. I'm going to do that in both. Okay, and then one of them I need to start up the containers. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so let's review a little bit. If I do this, right, Docker machine IP my Docker, then it displays the beginning part of the URL that I need to connect to the web pages, right? So if I want to run the Project 3 web pages, I need to start off with this, okay? But remember, from the Docker compose.yaml file, the Apache server, which is broadcasting on port 80 inside the PHP Apache container, when it comes outside to the host, it uses port 8080, so it doesn't conflict with the regular stuff on port 80. Okay, so we're going to need to have 192.168.80.131:8080, and you cannot assume that the machine I tested on is going to have exactly the same thing as what you have here. So part of the setup is to state that this is what you need to do in order to get the correct address to run your application, right? So that's important. Okay, the other thing to remind yourself in the setup is if you go Docker Network ls and just to list the Docker networks, then you can see the one that we're interested in, Docker CENT280 Win7_default. We want to take a look at the gateway value when we inspect that network. So if I go Docker Network inspect, and then I put the first 6 or so letters, hex number actually of 2A06, yeah, of the network, and then I pipe it to group regular expression -I, so I don't have to get the case of gateway exactly to match whatever is inside of the output. Then you can see this, and this again is most likely not the same as the machine that it's going to be tested on. So in project3.php, okay, you need to make sure that the IP for the host gets updated to that. Okay, so that's part of the setup, very important to put that in. So those are two different IP addresses that you have to take into account in the setup. Okay, so hopefully you knew that. You already made notes on that, so when you turn in your project, that's already in there. Okay, well that's in there. All right, so that's some basic setup. Okay, now, so what I'd like to do here, I'm going to go Docker compose, and I'm going to get into the Postgres SQL container. Okay, and I'm going to go into the Project 3 folder inside of include. Okay, that's the one where our SQL scripts are located. Okay, and then the first terminal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Docker compose, and I'm going to go into the PHP Apache container. And so you notice the prompt when it comes up is where the web document root is. And so here's the other Project 3 folder, right? There's two folders, and this is where your main PHP scripts are. Now, I don't really want to edit any of my PHP scripts here inside the container, because in the host I have Genie, and that's a more powerful editor than Nano, which is all I have inside the PHP Apache container. But if I'm making changes to these files, what I would like to do here is run the lint command to check for syntax errors at least, right? So that's why I want to be in the PHP Apache container, but I also want to be here. And here what I want to do is I want to be inside the database. Okay, as the regular user Bob. Okay, so I'm inside of project 3_db. This is a greater than symbol, not the pound symbol, so you know you're logged in as Bob, not the super user CENT280 man. Okay, and then you could just take a look around a little bit, \D. Okay, we got those departments, and actually last time we created add initial data.sql, and you had to actually work through that. And we got the departments and the divisions already set up in there, so that if I do this, yeah, I should see something really simple like this. Okay, div 1 and div 2, and then select star from departments. Okay, department A, B, C, D, and E, and department A and B are in division 1, and department C, D, and E are in division 2. Okay, and that's what we did last time. Okay, and if you look, okay, so that's department divisions. Okay, we also have users stored inside of there. And so if I did this, you're going to see there's a whole bunch of stuff, and there's 9 rows. So there's 9 users stored inside of there. That's probably not the best way to check what's going on there. So, you know, you might do something like this. Select username from users. Then you can see the 9 records, and then you can see the people that are in there. Okay? But to know what the actual passwords are, you would have to look at the addusers.sql script. Okay, so let's go back to Genie, and I'm going to actually open that up. So I have to go up to Docs, down into Include Project 3, and I'm going to open addusers.sql. And then it's also a good idea to open init.sql, because if we're going to be storing stuff in the database, it's always a good idea to remind ourselves of what the field names are. You can always do things like this. Okay, so if you did \D, you go, okay, I want to see what's inside the users table in terms of fields. I can go \D, then put the table name users, and then I can see what's in there, what's defined for that. Okay. Same thing. Let's. I'm going to hit Control L. If I do \D, there's also the requests table. So let's take a look at that. Okay. So you could look at it and say, okay, there's ID, user ID, requests, costs, and then so forth. Okay. So those are the 4 fields that are in the requests table. Okay, and so you could remind yourself that way, but a lot of times it's also very good to just be able to look at it here, right, inside of init.sql. Simpler to look at it that way. Okay, so you have 2 ways of looking at it, but let's keep that in mind. Okay, so for my add users, if I look at this, I can see the username and passwords that I use to get those people logged in. Right now, if you think about what's going on, what we have so far, the only users I should try to log in with would be Jane Doe, because Jane Doe is a department head, okay, or Catherine Johnson. Catherine Johnson's also department head. Bruce Perrins and Eric Raymond, they're also department heads, and Scott Birkin. So we got a choice of like 5 different users. We'll stick with Jane Doe because that's an easy one, because it's easy to remember the password because we use that so many times already. But that's basically what we want to do to kind of get going. Okay, so I start up Google Chrome. Okay, and this is why web programming can be difficult, is you have lots of places you have to look, right? You run the web application in the browser, but you have PHP scripts, and then you also have the backend database, okay? So that's 3 places that you have to look at. So the reason why we try to make sure we got all the Postgres SQL stuff, all the backend database stuff working correctly before we deal with any of the PHP, is to make it so that you don't have as many places to look for when something is not working. All right, so it would have been better if I actually had put a bookmark here, okay, but I'm just going to connect into that. All right, and then it redirects me to logout, and logout redirects me again to login.php. The reason why index.php goes to logout first is because it clears the session data. Okay, so that's always a good precaution when you set up a web application that uses session data, is to clear that session data whenever you log out, because you don't want that session to be active with somebody else trying to basically connect to your web application. Okay, that was one of the kinds of exploits that was commonly used because people didn't close this session, wipe out the session data when the person logs out. Also, there's a default setting for the amount of time before the session data expires, and for really sensitive databases, you probably shorten the default amount. Okay, the default amount of time that PostgreSQL uses for session data to expire if there's no activity is 24 minutes. So you might want to shorten that if it's highly sensitive data. The danger in shortening it is that it makes it for possibly a less friendly user experience, right? Because if the person's doing something and then you say that it's not active for 5 minutes, then it basically wipes out the session data, so they got to log in again, then that's not so much fun for a person that's using it, right? So in any case, the trade-off would be that if somebody knows they're doing stuff that involves highly sensitive data, they would accept that they got to be active on it or they're going to get logged out. And the worst that happens, they just got to log back in again. Okay, so that's a good trade-off. All right, so I'm going to log in with Jane Doe. Okay, and I get to this page. So it appears to be working up until this point, right? And so if I go back, let's look at this. Right? A lot of places we got to look. Okay, handle login. Okay, I store this information. I didn't store div name, right? I didn't store it yet. I'm going to have to. That's on you. You got to do that. Okay, and in home.php, I'm only handling one case, which is department head. This is why I logged in as Jane Doe. Okay, I could have also logged in as Catherine Johnson, Bruce Perrins, Eric Raymond, or Scott Birkin. Okay, I could have used those people, but I'm sticking with Jane Doe because I can remember the password very easily. Okay, you try to reduce the places that stuff could go wrong when you're building it up, right? That makes it easier to develop things. All right, so I was able to log in as Jane Doe, so then that's good. You could try some of the other ones. Let's say that I'm going to try Eric Raymond. So Eric Raymond, his username is too hard for me to remember. So I'm going to say Bruce Perrins, bparents@gmail.com, open source. So I come here, I log out, it clears the session data. Open_source, and I hit enter, and Bruce Perrins can log in. Okay, so I've convinced that I can log in as a department head. Okay, you don't have to do that part, I'm just doing some extra testing. But then I'm going to go back to Jane Doe. Because Jane Doe is the first user, Jane Doe's user ID is 1, things of that nature. I know that makes it easier to test, right? Choose a way that you don't have to figure out too many things. Try to make it so that just you know what the values should be when you're doing the testing. Okay, so the next step to test, if you look at the directions, let's look at the directions for project 3, it says that the scripts that you're going to need to modify, oops, I passed it, sorry. Okay, handle login.php, home.php, choose request.php, handle edit request. So those 4 files. So if you look at add request and handle add request, that pair of scripts are used to handle adding in a request. And it doesn't say you need to change those, so it would be reasonable to assume that that should work. So when I test my application, since I'm logged in as Jane Doe, let's see if I can add a request for Jane Doe. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so I'm logged in as Jane Doe. I go add request. Okay, so there's a text box here. So you're testing things. So I go request. And this is my first request. So request 1 for Jane Doe. And then the cost, let's make it $100. Okay, let's put it in like this. I hit enter. If it worked, we should have been able to see that record get entered here, that record for that request. So it did not work. But there's no error message here, right? All you see is that it didn't update this. So something is going wrong. So if I go to my window, my terminal where I have the database open, I could do the following, right? I could go select star from requests, nothing in there. So it didn't get into the database, that's why it's not showing up on the page. So then the next question is, how come it didn't go into the database? Okay, so now this part gets tricky because you're only writing part of the code. If you wrote the whole code and you did things incrementally, maybe you wouldn't have this error. But you have this error because some of the code is given to you and you just got to fill in parts of it. And so let's think about what could be going wrong. So the 2 scripts, okay, let me type, I just typed ls, that are involved are add request.php and handle add request.php. Now, if there were errors in those, maybe that would have shown up on the web page, maybe not. So let's do the following first. I'll go php-l, okay, for checking for syntax errors, add request.php. No syntax error. Okay, so there's no syntax errors there. php-l, handle add request.php, also no syntax errors. Okay, so it's not a syntax error that's causing the problem. I would like to look then at add request.php and handle add request.php to try to figure out what might be going wrong. Okay, so where do I do that? I go back to the host where I can use Genie. I don't want to look at it inside of the PHP Apache container where I only have nano. Right? I want to go where I have the more powerful scripts. Okay, now, so I have these files open. These 2 are inside the project 3, inside the include directory. These are the SQL script side. Okay. These 2 are inside of the project 3, inside of CENT280. They're in the PHP Apache side, right? So if I want to open add request.php, I click on one of these files, and then when I go open, it'll be looking in the same directory that this file is located in. That's how Genie works. Okay, so I'll go open. Yeah, so it's inside the main PHP thing. If I was still looking at add users and I click on open, then it's going to open it in the other folder where I have all my SQL scripts. Okay, so that's just a little thing, but anything to make things go a little bit easier, right? I click on one of the ones in the folder that I know the file is located in, then I click on open, then I'm going to open up add request.php. Okay, so let's look at this. We know there's no syntax errors, and let's look at what actually is going on in this. Okay, so we got our form, and the processing script is handle add request.php. So that's the next file that we need to open up. We might as well open up that file right now. Okay, so I'll go open handle add request.php. Okay, so let's go back to the first one. That's where it starts. And what you see here is that They're basically only one statement inside of the PHP area, that's PHP code, and that's to start the session. That statement is required for all pages to maintain the session data. So if I didn't have this statement in here, as soon as I call add request, it just wiped out my session data. Okay, so you gotta be careful when you're using session data to always make sure you have this in all your scripts that basically need to maintain session data. You break that anywhere along the chain and your session data is wiped out. Okay, so this is super important, but you don't have to worry about it, it's there. Okay, but if you look at this, this just has a form. So what is important about this form? It's the name of the variables that are going to get passed via post. Okay, so here, the name of the text area is request. So the data is going to be stored in a variable called request, in a post variable called request. And the cost is going to be stored in a variable called cost, C-O-S-T. So request and cost, those are the two important things. If we have a mismatch, when we look at handle add request, that could explain why it didn't work. Okay, so I go to handle add request, and what I do is I look at the data that's passed via post, and request and cost, those are spelled correctly. It matches what was in the form. So that's not the source of the error, right? So that's the first thing that I look at. It's the first thing I check. Okay, so there's going to be something on this side, not add request, that is going to be is what's leading to this thing not working at this point. So let's start looking at what we have here. Okay, so these two things are correct. We got our SQL statement. Okay, we're using that insert request function. Okay, so insert request, when it goes select insert request, this is then a PLPG SQL function. So, what if that function doesn't even exist? Then basically we're going to run into an error right here. Okay, so how do we determine if insert request, that PLPG SQL function, is already in there? And I go back to the database. So instead of going \D, I want to go \DF. But before I do that, let me go \A to make the output unaligned, and then I'll go \DF. Okay? So if you look at it, right, here's the reason why we ran drop.sql. Because if I had the 36 functions from the PG crypto extension, instead of just having 7 right here, there would be 34 more. So there would be 41 rows to look through. Now, when I look at this, I don't see insert request anywhere. Oh, that's a problem. Okay? So, in fact, look at insert request. It expects you can pass the user ID, the text for the request, and then the cost, and then that should work. So you start thinking, okay, that's where the problem starts. Okay, so, right, if you look here, inside of include project 3, I don't have anything, right, that basically has that kind of function defined. I got init.sql, right, let's look at just the SQL scripts. I got auth funcs, I know that's in there. I know I ran drop.sql, and I know I ran add users and add initial data. So basically I don't have a file that has the insert requests in there. Okay, so I need something like this. Okay, so let's work on that right now then. Okay, so when I do that, what I'm going to do is I'll make sure that I'm on the SQL side, and then I'm going to make a new file. And I'm just going to call this insertfuncs.sql. Okay, I want to save it. And then you look, oh, there's 2 project 3 folders. So I choose one of them. Okay, and I look, that's the wrong one, because this is inside of CENT280. So I go up to docs, and I drop down into include and then into project 3, now this is the right place. Okay, so this will be insert funcs.sql. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to put in a function. So here, let's do it like this. We will create function insert request. Okay, and when we do this, the hint is when we look at this, it should have user ID, request text, and then cost. Okay, so I'll say underscore UID, that's a user ID, that should be an integer. Okay, then I should have request text, so I'll go REQ text, and that's text. And then I need cost, underscore cost, and then that's going to be numeric. Okay, and then this is going to be returns something. Well, what should this return? This function doesn't need to really return anything, so I'll go returns void as, and then I'll put my $, and then the language PLPGSQL. Okay, and then while I'm at that, what I could do is I could say drop function if exists insert underscore request integer text numeric. Okay, so I start to set this up. We know that any function like this, there's going to be a begin and then an end that has a semicolon at the end of it. Okay, and then we could have some local variables in a declare. So let's think of what we would actually need, okay, in order to get this thing to work. All right, so this is an insert query. So let's start setting up our insert query. So insert into, right? That's how insert always starts, insert into. And what we want to insert into is the requests table, right? So if I look at init.sql, right, here's the request. I want to insert the request table, okay, user ID, request text, and cost. And this thing is serial, so that means that I'm going to put the names. Okay, so let's look at the names again. User underscore ID. Okay, then request underscore text. All right, we got to get this spelled correctly. Comma. Let's go to the next line. And then cost. Values, and then so this will be the user ID that's passed, the underscore request text that's passed, and then underscore cost. Okay, remember when we define our parameter names, okay, in the parameter list, I always start them off with underscore so that they won't conflict, they won't collide with field names from the database, right? Because my convention is not to give any field names in the database an underscore to start it off, right? So that way, by my own convention, I avoid problems with that. When you do web programming, it always is a lot of doing things in a way that you avoid errors. Because if you do that, then there's a lot less trouble associated with it. If you do things kind of haphazardly, you're going to have so many places where errors could occur. It's really quite frustrating to do web programming. Okay, so it's actually really difficult kind of programming. not to scare you, you should take CENT285 if that's something that's a skill that you want to get. Okay? But you do have to have good habits. Otherwise, it can be really a frustrating thing to do. Okay, so looks like that's all I need to do in order to get that to work. So here's what I'm going to do. All right, I created this. If I go to my second terminal here, and I go /I insert funcs.sql, got this notice, but that's okay. It's just saying it doesn't exist, so we're not going to drop it. Okay, and then it creates the function. So if I now do /df, then insert request is in there. But once again, we're going to go back to how we started. Before I actually run the PHP script again, then I'm going to run this. So actually I made a mistake. The mistake I made was I didn't actually test this function out before, right, I did any PHP scripting. That was a mistake, but that's okay. I discovered it now. So you go back. So don't compound the mistake by forgetting to test this before I go back to any PHP script, right? So how can I test this? I'm going to go select, let me hit a Control L. Select ID, username from users. So I can check Jane Doe's user ID is 1. Okay, I wanted to know what Jane Doe's ID is. Now you knew it was 1, but we just double checking, right? Verifying. Okay, so then if I go select, right, insert request. Now, what goes into that? Check your code again, right? You need the user's ID, request text, and then the cost. So 1 for Jane Doe, right? And then let's put request 1 test. Okay, that's single quotes because that's text. Then I need to put a cost. So let's put $150 there. Okay, and so when I run this, I'm testing the insert request PLPG-SQL function. Okay, now it looked like it worked. How do I test it? I check, and it's in there. So if I go back to my application, the web application, and I hit reload, shows up there. Okay, so now I have part of it working. So here we're looking back at the code now. Yeah, this is where it gets fun. This part should work now. Okay, but is that the only possible source of error? No, it's not. So let's look at the rest of the code. All right, so we prepared an SQL statement, select insert request. Okay, that looks okay. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, then I'm going to put in the values. So what I want to do is, here's my placeholder text for user ID. Let me move it a little bit. Yeah. Here's my placeholder for my request text. Here's my placeholder for the cost. So let's look at those 3 values that are being set in this array. Okay, so we go user ID, we get it out of the session data, user ID. Okay, request text is the request, this is the cost. Those are the values that's passed by post, but we already checked to see if those names match the form, and those are okay. So these 2 are okay. Is this one okay? Actually, that's where the problem is. I knew that's where the problem is, but that's because I wrote the code. So that would be harder for you to figure out. But if you go by process of elimination, since this function works, we tested it in the database, since these 2 variables match the form, those are correct. If it doesn't work now, it's something on this line. Right? Because that's the only other variable that we have. So process of elimination. So how do I check that? I go back to here and let's try to add in another request. The difference is now I'm not adding it in directly to the database, but I'm using the web application to do so. Okay, so I click on add request and I'll say request 2 for Jane Doe and the cost is $100. And I go enter. Didn't show up. If I go back to the database and I go select star from requests, okay, there's something there and you go, what? How did that happen? Well, let's look at it carefully. In this case, I'm going to go back to align format just so that you can look at it. So it's a little bit easier to see, okay? And here's the thing that's no good, right? In the definition in init.sql, if user underscore ID is not supplied, then it leaves it blank because it's not a required field. It's not one of those not null fields, right? So, right, take a look at it. Yeah? ID is serial, that cannot be null. But this stuff, all it is this, and as long as it doesn't violate that, actually you might think, oh, doesn't that actually violate that thing, so it should not have been inserted? Yeah, I think so too, but it got inserted. So what was wrong though? What is wrong is it has no user ID. We know that's the one we just inserted because if you look at the text, right, it says request 2 for Jane Doe as $100. So this is wrong, and it doesn't actually display it in the table because it didn't associate this with Jane Doe. So it doesn't show it in the web application. So there's something clearly wrong with this. And so if you go back to the code, there's something wrong here. And you're going, huh? I thought I stored ID in the session data. So where did you store it? Now you got to go back and say, where did I store it? It was in handle login.php. So let's take a look at this and look at the session data that's stored. Right here, right here, right here. Okay, so department name, that must be being stored correctly, otherwise Jane Doe couldn't get logged in. Okay. User type, that also had to be stored correctly, otherwise Jane Doe couldn't get logged in. Oh, ID. Look at the name of it. It's ID. Okay. Look at the name here. User underscore ID. That's a mismatch, okay? So it's stored as ID, but we expected it here to be stored as user underscore ID. That's the problem. That's basically, I knew that we were going to run into that because I looked at it between last time and this time. So, how are we going to deal with this? Let's look at some ways that can make your lives a little bit easier just by knowing some tools. Now, we want to use group regular expression. I gotta use this inside the container because inside the Windows host, I don't have group regular expression, right? That's not a command available to me. But in programming, when you have a bunch of scripts that have to work together, group regular expression can be your best friend. In fact, when I teach CENT285 using group regular expression, I can usually detect if the students wrote the code correctly because it helps me to search through stuff very quickly. So this is what you would do. You do this, you go grep, and what I want to look for is this string. Now, in the handout, I put backslash, then this, like this, but actually you could just search on session. The reason why there's an escape character here is because when you're using regular expressions, that square bracket is a special character in group regular expression. So if you want it just to be treated as a character, left square bracket, you have to escape it like this. Okay, but actually, if you just left that off altogether, you go grep session and then start, that would work because session doesn't have any special characters, right? And then any place you see session with the square bracket, it would be, you would also have session. So that would have worked also. Okay, but I do this, and this is what you see. All right. So let's look at the mismatch. Okay, so when I was storing department name, okay, when I was storing department name, user type, okay, in order to do that, okay, I was using department name, user type, that's okay, that matches. So that's going to work okay, and that actually makes sense at this point that those things would be working, because otherwise Jane Doe couldn't log in. Okay, so where the mismatch is right here. Now, this one in handle add request expects the user ID to be stored in a session variable called user underscore ID. Okay. But when we did store it, this is okay, this is the correct value. When we did store it, we chose the wrong name if we wanted it to match. So by using group regular expression, it helps you to search through all the files in that directory, right? Because you say star, and then so it finds that very quickly. It also tells you, okay, if which file it's located in. So this tells me I gotta fix handle login. Now let me modify this just a little bit. I'm gonna go grep, okay, -n, and then put session. And let me just show you, if you just put session like this, without putting that square bracket, then you don't need the backslash in front of it. So this actually would have been a simpler way. And if you look at it, okay, so here's the part I need to fix, right? But if you put -n, then it tells you line 23. So I go handle login line 23. I need to change this to user underscore ID instead of ID. Okay, so group regular expression, you're going to do a lot of programming. Get familiar with the basics of that because you use it all the time. Okay, once we tried to enter this robotics competition and to figure out what was going on, we're using grep all the time because we had to reverse engineer like 80% of the code for that stuff. Okay, so group regular expression, everybody that was on the team learned how to use that quite well. Okay, so handle login, line 23. Okay, so handle login, line 23 right here. Okay, so I can go right to there. I go user, turn off the caps lock, user underscore ID. I change it. I come back to this terminal and I go grep session for all their files, and then now I don't have the mismatch, right? So I know it's fixed there. So what do I need to do? I go back to my application, okay, and I log out, okay, I log back in as Jane Doe, because then it trashes the session variables so that when I log in, it's a new set of session variables. Okay, I'm going to add a request. Okay, so this will be request 3 for Jane Doe, cost, and it shows up. Okay, so now it's working. Okay, so what should I do to the database if I discover something like this? It probably would be worth it to clear out the data and then add in whatever initializing scripts that you need. Okay, so let's do that. So I come back to my second one here, right? And this is what I want to get rid of, right? Those things in there, right? This record is bad. So the best way, since this is still test data, is just go /i init.sql. Okay. When you do that, the functions are still all in there, right? When you do /i init, all it does is clear out the tables, but I don't have any data in the tables yet, and so I need to make sure I add in the initial data. And one more thing, I add in the users. Okay, and then I go back and test, and I'm going to test to see if the application works correctly. Oh, I should have logged out before I did that, but that's okay. Okay, so I log in as Jane Doe. Okay, I will add request one for Jane, and I'm going to say $100, enter, comes in correctly. Okay, so what would I do next? I would go log out, and I would go Bruce Parents, and Bruce Parents' password is open_source in mine. That's how I set mine up. And I'm going to go add request one for Bruce, and this will be $200. I go OK, and then looks like I can add in for Bruce. I could add in for any department head, but I can't put it in for a member or a division head because I don't have those things working yet. Okay, so let's reiterate what remains to be done. Okay, so we fixed what would have been a tough to track down error in storing our session variables, but you still have to store one more session variable because there's 4 things that are returned when you call check user. So you got to store the div name. Okay, so don't forget that. Okay, so that's what you need to modify here. Then you go back to home.php. You got to modify 2 things. Okay, so the first thing you got to do is, I'm only grabbing hold of 2 out of the 4 session variables. So make sure you grab all 4, so a couple more there. And then add the cases for member and for div head. So to do that, you're going to have to think carefully about how you're going to select from the request view. Okay, so a way to get a handle on that would be the following. I go back to the database. So before I change any PHP code again, I want to look at what's going on in the database, and I'm going to go select star from requests view. Okay. Oh, it's okay like that. Okay. So what comes back? First name, last name, username, department name, div name, user ID, request text, the cost, and the request ID. Okay, those are all the things that come back. Okay, so I got 1 for Jane and 1 for Bruce. So now you need to use your imagination a little bit and think of how would I do this for a member. Okay, so if what I want to do is show it for the department head, right? Department head. And I look back at this code, user type equals department head, select star from request view where department name matches the department name. So let's see that in fact, we know it's working correctly, but let's look at it in action in the database itself. Okay, so select star from requests view where department name, right? Department name, that's this field right here, equals department A. Then you get Jane Doe's record, right? If I say Bruce Parents, who is in department C, then I get Bruce's record. So that's a way of returning all the requests for the department because the department head can see everything in the department, right? So how would you get it for someone who is a member, right? Just a member of the department, they're not the department head. That person cannot see everything in the department. They can only see their own, right? So for that, you want to do something like this. Select star from requests view where UID equals, say, 1 in order to get only Jane Doe's ones, right? Then if there are other people in the department like John Doe, you wouldn't see John Doe's request. If you say department name equals department A, then you would get Jane Doe and John Doe. But if you just say UID equals 1, you only get Jane Doe. Or you go UID equals 2, then you only get John Doe's one. So to make it work, what you want to do is either inside the database, insert requests for everybody, because you can always clear it out very easily, right? Or what is the other option? The other option is to get these things working so that with the web application you can insert data for John Doe, for Bill Gates, whoever. But I'm going to tell you that that's not a good way to do things, because you try to make it work at the database level first before you make it work here. To get the SQL statement correct here, test that out in the database. So you insert some additional requests, put it in for the different kind of users. Which users are we talking about? Okay, so we got Jane Doe in, we got Bruce Perens in. What if I insert a record for John Doe directly into the database, not the web application? I can certainly do that, right? And so there's a member. And then what about a div head like Bill Gates? I could put that in, a request for Bill Gates, and then I have then the 3 different types of users, right? And then I can see if things would work correctly. Okay, so this is what you do. Okay, let's say I'll go select ID, comma, username from users. Okay, so John Doe is user ID 2. So I'm going to go select, insert request, okay, John Doe, and I'll just say request 1 for John, and I'll just give it a number, 200. It's inserted in. Okay, so I got John Doe. I also want Bill Gates. Bill Gates is user ID 4. Okay, put that in. So now I have 4 requests. So let's do the following. Select star from requests view. 4 rows, right? I got 2 I inserted in with the application, but 2 I just went straight into the database. Why? Because it's super easy to insert there. I don't need the rest of the web application working. I just do it directly there. Right? So when you do web programming, you do back and forth. But when you're adding something new, fix it on the database side first, make sure that works, then go back to the PHP script side, the front end side. Okay, so watch this then. I go select star from request view where department name equals department A. Then I see Jane Doe and and Bill Gates request. Oh yeah, actually, I'm trying to think if we're even supposed to allow Bill Gates to enter anything in there. But anyway, Bill Gates, yeah, got inserted as department A. All right. What if I did the following? Okay, where UID equals 2. Then I just get John Doe's 1 and nobody else's. Because John Doe is a member, so I got to select. The criteria is based on the user ID. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. what about I want to show everything in div 1? Then I would say select star from request view. I should have just hit an up arrow. Where div name equals div 1. Okay? Then Jane Doe, John Doe, and Bill Gates, all three rows show up because all of them, their division name matches div 1. So by playing around with this, you can go back here and figure out how to put in those two cases there. Okay, and then so you can get the proper SQL statement for that to work. So this is what you should do. Go to home.php, or first handle login.php, make sure all the session variables are stored. Home.php, retrieve all the session variables, then start adding these cases. The way to add those cases is by inserting some data directly into the database, okay, and then looking at what you have to run as the queries in order to pull things up correctly, and then okay, you can go back and fix home.php. All right, let me see if there was anything else I want you folks to look at. Okay, so then yeah, you need to be able to do this. That's the last thing. So the way you do that, right, is you go into the database, you insert some data using the insert request function. Let me do something to make things a little more straightforward. All right, so in the resources, oh, by the way, before I forget, I updated Postum, so if you want to check what your grade is at this point, you can certainly go ahead and check that. Okay, so resources, daily work, and I want to go to today's folder, and what I want to put in there is the insert funcs.sql that I just created. Now that's a SQL script, not PHP, so that one I can upload directly, right? So let me do that. Okay, so I need to go into the include project 3 insert funcs.sql. Okay, so I'm going to upload that in case you didn't get that working quite correctly. You can include that in. That will allow you to easily add in requests, okay, and then you can check, okay, and make sure that it works correctly, your SQL statements, then go back to your home.php and then fix that. That's the basic idea. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. If you got questions, raise your hand and I'll come around, take a look at what you have. Okay, but that basically is what you want to do. Okay, so if you can get that working by the end of today, that would be great.